Can you really divorce teaching from learning and saying, teaching is what the teacher does? Whether or not the student learns or not, I can be a great teacher? Can we make that divorce? Well, in your notebook, take a look at the mindset, and there's two passages there I want to look at with you. One of them is Deuteronomy 4:1, and the other one is Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 1. Deuteronomy 4:1 says, "Now, O Israel, listen to the statutes and judgments which I teach you to observe, that you may live, and go in and possess the land which the Lord God of your fathers is giving you." And the question I had in my mind is, what does the Bible mean when it says, "I teach"? What does it mean to teach? The second verse is very similar to the first, only it flips it around. It's Deuteronomy 5:1, and it says, "And Moses called all Israel, and said to them, Hear, O Israel, the statutes and judgments which I speak in your hearing today, that you may learn them." Question, what does it mean to learn? So the next thing I did is what you probably would do. I brought out my Hebrew Old Testament to look up the word teach and to look up the word learn. And there it is. Deuteronomy 4:1 and Deuteronomy 5:1. Helps a lot, doesn't it? Well, here is the word teach right here. And here is the word learn. What does it mean to teach and to learn? So I took out a piece of paper and I wrote those two Hebrew words down. This one means to learn, and this one means to teach. And then I said to myself, well, that's a prefix and that's a suffix. In Hebrew, that's the root of the word, and it's the letters L, M, D, lamad. What does it mean to learn? So the next thing I did is I went out to my Hebrew dictionary to look up the word lamad, looking for a helpful insight. This is why you go to seminary, to find an insight, some pay dirt, some gold. So I looked up the word lamad, saying to myself, what does it really mean? It means to learn. I kept on looking down further and further, and there it is, Deuteronomy 5:1. It means to learn something, not pay dirt. Well, the next thing I go back to that word, and I say, now, what does it mean to teach? And I looked up that word and realized that's a prefix, and there is no suffix there, and that's the letters L, M, D, L, M, D, L, M, D. Wait a minute, you can't tell me that the same word means to learn as it does to teach. Because if it did, do you realize the significance? Never again could we say, I'm a great teacher if my students aren't learning. That God wanted to make a point, and He didn't want to stutter when He made it, and that is when teaching and learning are talked about, they're the same word. That I have not taught unless you have learned. So I went back to my dictionary and looked up the word to teach. There it was, the same word, lamad. Kept looking further down, further down, further down, and there it is, Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 1, to teach. Well, that's the root. The root means to learn, but when you put it in the PL, it means to teach. Therefore, I had to question, what happens when you put a word in the PL? I'm getting a little technical here, but I want you to see something. So what I did is I looked up my Hebrew grammar book to find out what it means in the PL. This is really helpful. It says the fundamental idea of the PL is to busy oneself eagerly, look at this, to busy oneself eagerly with the action indicated by the stem. What is the stem? To learn. If I put the word to learn in the PL, it means to busy oneself eagerly with your learning. Look down a little bit further. It means to urge, to cause others to do the same. Hence, it means, learn in the PL means to teach. It's causing someone. It's an eager pursuit of an action. And the issue here is that when God says, go teach, He doesn't mean it's what the teacher does. It means it's what takes place in the life of the student. When I teach, therefore, as far as God's concerned, it's not what the teacher does up front. It's not the material the teacher has. It's not the gestures the teacher has. It's nothing that the teacher does. Teaching is what takes place in your life. And if you haven't learned, then I haven't taught. Do you see how God says you can't make this separation? You have to bring them together. There has to be a marriage in there. How do you know if you have a great teacher? Answer, did you learn a lot? And the issue of the PL is, I'm supposed to urge you and cause you and chase after you until you start learning. That's why Hendricks got out of everything, went down the aisle and yelled at a senior graduate student because it drove him up the proverbial wall. Why did it drive him up a wall? Because he knew he stopped teaching. He stopped teaching because I wasn't learning. 99% of us keep right on talking because we've defined teaching as talking. And we've said, it makes no difference whether you're learning it or not. My job is to cover the material. Ladies and gentlemen, your job is not to cover the material. My job is to cause the person to learn. And if they're not learning, stop covering the material. Are you with me? Very quiet out there. A lot of this. How many of you had teachers that thought their job was to cover the material? Yeah. Can you imagine what would happen if they changed their mind and decided to be a biblical teacher? Well, let's see if we can't summarize that on that chart called the APL model. On the left-hand box, let's put down the word teacher, teacher, or speaker. Now, on the right-hand box, put down the word student. And in the middle, with the open book there, is the subject. The subject. What typically happens is the teacher thinks their responsibility is to focus, notice that arrow there, the arrow is focused on the subject. And the teacher thinks their responsibility is to lecture about the subject. And the student thinks their job is to listen. Listen. The teacher thinks their job is to give out words. And the student thinks their job is to write those words. Now, I don't know what it was like when you went to school or are going to school, but oftentimes in so many of the classes we attended, what took place as the teacher just went on and we wrote and wrote, nothing went in gear except our hands. And we call that the pit of passivity. And indeed, learning was not taking place. Now, what is the biblical concept of teaching then, my friends? You see how the focus is? The focus of the teachers on the subject, the focus of the students on the subject. God's trying to say the subject is not supposed to be the focus of the teacher. You can ask a teacher, what do you teach? I teach math. Well, if you teach math, it's not the same as I teach students math. A lot of people teach math whose students did not learn math. The Bible would say then that they did not teach. They covered the material. You know what covering material looks like? We cover the material. Therefore, if you wanted to get the biblical perspective, to be a biblical teacher or speaker, it is to cause to learn. Cause to learn. It's a realization that my focus is on the students. It's on that person saying, are you getting it or not? Because if you're not getting it, I'm not teaching. Now let's see if we can't get a little bigger handle on this. Take a look at the next section, which is called the APL Maxims. And those maxims are principles, big ideas about how learning takes place. And I want to see if we can't deepen your understanding of it. The first one is, teachers are responsible to cause the students to learn. It's the teacher who's the one who's responsible. I remember coming back from a conference like this where I brought my teenage son with me. And the next day he went to his school class and his high school. And he came back and he said at the dinner time, he said, Dad, those teachers, they need to come to your class. They're not causing me to learn. And I knew something was coming, and he smiled and he said, well, you know, Dad, those math grades, they're not my fault. They're not causing me to learn. And my wife looked across the table like, what are you teaching my son? And I said to Dave, well, Dave, you need to know the law of the student. The student is responsible to learn regardless of the quality of the teacher. Now, I'm not here to teach you how to be a better learner. I'm going to flip that over. My job tonight in this conference is to teach you how to be a better teacher. That causes the student to learn. But unless you assume the responsibility of causing that person to learn, you can forget ever being a great teacher. All great teachers have way down in the deep side of their heart that belief that says, it's my responsibility to cause you to learn. It's like Winston Churchill once said. He said, personally, I'm always ready to learn, although I don't always like to be taught. It's like your grandmother. Maybe you can remember this growing up, where your grandmother gets kind of frustrated with you, and she gets over you and starts waggling that finger, and she says, I'm going to learn you, young man. Remember that? I'm going to not teach you, I'm going to learn you. She was so intent on you getting it, she realized the whole point is, did you learn it? Guy Dowd, who was the National Teacher of the Year, he said, I suspected that this teacher that he had would feel that if I had failed, she had failed. And she seemed bound and determined to teach me. She gave me back my hope. Do you feel as a teacher, if they're not learning, you're failing? It's a whole different approach, isn't it? Number 2, second maxim. Teachers will stand accountable to God for their influence. Teachers will stand accountable to God for their influence. That's a heavy maxim. I want you to write down 2 verses beneath that. That's James chapter 3, verse 1. James chapter 3, verse 1, and Hebrews chapter 13, verse 17. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 17. James chapter 3, verse 1 goes like this. My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. Look at that. Let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we, that is, those of us who become teachers, shall receive a stricter judgment. Judgment from whom? From God. But if I'm not responsible, then how can God hold me accountable? The point of it is, I am responsible. That's why I can be held accountable. And I'm going to be held accountable on a more strict basis because of the amount of responsibility that I have. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 17 says, obey those who rule over you and be submissive, for they watch out for your souls as those who must give account. Must give account. And I think when Dr. Hendricks changed all those gears and eventually walked down the aisle, he had way back in the back of his mind that God's holding him accountable to cause me to learn. Number 3, teachers are responsible because they can control the big 4, the subject, the style, the setting, and the speaker. The subject, the style, the setting, and the speaker. How can a person be responsible? How can a person be responsible? Can you make someone learn who doesn't want to learn? You can't do it. You can't force someone to learn. What can you do then? Well, you can come down to this person and say, what's in my control? What's in my control is my subject, because they can control subject. That is, I can change my mind right now and start talking about our president if I wanted to. You're not in control of that. I'm in control of that. And if I'm not holding your attention with the subject I'm doing, I have everything in my power to change the subject and make it different. It's in my control. I control the subject to influence you to learn. I also control, number 2, the style. I can have a real quiet style. I can all of a sudden start becoming very animated if you're not with it too much. I'm in control of my style. And I can stand right next to Roger and say, Roger, how are you? Poor Roger doesn't have a chance. Like that person who was looking out the window. I did not have a chance when Hendricks said what he said. I had to pay attention. See, if you think in the back of your mind, I'm the one who's responsible, you start getting after the student. You start changing it. The style, the setting. You can have people stand up, get in small groups, walk outside, stand and sing. You're in control of it. You're also in control of yourself. The speaker, I can sit down. I can be quiet. I can take out pictures of my family and show them to you. I'm in control. But what I'm not in control of is I'm not in control of you. But I can use those 4 different things to get after you so that it causes you to learn and respond.